Hi, this is Paul. This is part of my Rough Draft for Sunday series where I run through my sermon to the degree that it's put together on Friday. It may change on Sunday, and you can find that on the Livingstone CRC YouTube channel if you're curious how it ends up. I, like many of you, were quite surprised to hear that Anthony Bourdain was dead at 61. I had watched a lot of his shows on TV, and like many of you, I probably thought, gosh, what a life. Gets to travel all over the world, go to interesting places, eat amazing food, meet interesting people. Not only does he eat amazing food, he can cook amazing food. The guy was totally cool. Just was one of these lives that epitomized what I think the West looks at as the good life, the life that everyone wants. I'm sure he had plenty of money. I'm sure he had wonderful love interests. I have no idea about his personal life. I just watched his shows a number of times. My kids watched his shows. They were showing them to their high school classes. And then the news that he's dead at 61. And then, of course, well, what did he die of? Did he have cancer? And then the news that he took his own life. He was in France. He was filming another episode for CNN. And yeah, there it is. And then right there on the CNN website, a note about suicide. How the media handles suicide is always tricky for good reason, because suicide can be contagious. And that's one of the funniest things. There was a high-profile New Yorker. I didn't know who she was. I don't even know her name, but I just caught that was picked up then again in this article. She had taken her life. And over the years, I've preached about suicide fairly regularly, because it's fairly regularly that high-profile people who have everything in terms of the hierarchies and the ambitions and the goals and the ladders of this world they take their lives. One of the things that always strikes me is that when I lived in the Dominican Republic and I worked with Haitians who were illegal immigrants there, they had hard, poor, difficult lives, and I never once heard of a suicide. That doesn't mean that they never happened. I can't say that, but I never once heard of them. And you would imagine that people at the bottom end of the hierarchies, at the bottom end of the ladders, they would be the ones with hard lives who would take their lives. But no, we get these people who have what it seems everything the world can offer, and they end it all. Now, just recently, the CDC made a report. 45,000 people took their life in 2016. It's up there in the top. It's at least in the top 10 causes of death, and it's way above automobile. You're more like, in the United States, you're more than 50 times more likely to die of suicide than by a car accident. And a lot of talk about police violence. You're way, way more likely to take your own life than to be killed by a police officer. A number of years ago, I read this very interesting book on suicide called Stay, and it was a fascinating book, and I thought quite a good book. So many people are going to respond to this news with anger, and I saw something on Twitter where someone had a bunch of angry tweets about how selfish he was. Others are going to push it away, and we need to have a conversation about mental illness. And there's no question in my mind that for many people, biological depression is a cause of suicide. I don't want to diminish that. But in another sense, jumping to the mental illness conversation reduces the broader conversation about this. There are questions we simply don't want to ask about how, as a society and a culture, we have arranged our world, what we value, what we say is most estimable, what we aspire to. And I'm not acting as if the religious community like my own is somehow isolated from these things. Celebrity, wealth, power, access, privilege are all things that we all have a natural taste for and a desire for, and we imagine that this desire will somehow be satisfied by reaching the top, and by having the money, and by having the fame, and by having the travel, and by having the enjoyments of life. And so here someone that has publicly epitomized this takes his life, everyone just gasps. This isn't new. Leo Tolstoy, he's got huge books, War and Peace. It's almost epitomizes the big fat book. But a much smaller book, which is a very poignant book about his own spiritual journey, a confession. And he writes about how he had everything in the world. He was a successful author. He was the toast of the town. Everybody wanted his company, but he couldn't figure out what to do with the fact that one moment he could be alive and then he'd be dead, and today or tomorrow sickness and death will come. They had come already. To those I love, and to me nothing will remain but stench and worms. Sooner or later my affairs, whatever they may be, will be forgotten, and I shall no longer exist. And so he got to the point that he didn't dare be by himself, because he was sure with a gun or a rope he would take his life. Another interesting book this was by a Jewish rabbi, and I'll talk about David Brooks in a minute, who got some of his ideas from this rabbi. But he talks about the lonely life of the man of faith. And he looks upon himself as a stranger in modern society, which is technically minded, self-centered, and self-loving, almost in a sickly, narcissistic fashion, scoring honor upon honor, piling up victory upon victory, reaching to the distant galaxies, and seeing in here and now sensible world only manifestation of being. What can a man of faith like myself, living by a doctrine which has no technical potential, by a law which cannot be tested in the laboratory, steadfast in his loyalty to an eschatological vision whose fulfillment cannot be predicted with any degree of probability, let alone certainty, even by the most complex advanced mathematical calculations? What can such a man say to a functionally utilitarian society which is secular oriented, and those practical reasons of the mind have long ago supplanted the sensitive relations of the heart? What Soloveitchik, I can't say his name. Well, what he says is that he, being a rabbi, he's a fool in this world, because he's not living Anthony Bourdain's life. Well, maybe he got famous because he was the famous rabbi whose counsel everybody sought, but he didn't have women, he didn't have food experiences, he didn't have travel, he didn't have celebrity, he wasn't reaching the heights of all the pinnacles of this world. And what he said basically is that in this world you are nothing, and you're a fool to be such a person, to be a religious person, because, well, I play this out on my YouTube channel all the time. You can't lay hands on God. Let's say you have great faith. Does that mean you have money in the bank? Well, maybe you have some nice personal experiences. Well, maybe we can value that. But in the hierarchies and the ladders of this world, what does it mean? And then someone who has reached the top of a ladder just takes his life. And we say, what's going on? So David Brooks picked up on this in his book, The Road to Character. And what the rabbi was basically saying is that Genesis 1 seems to be, the Adam of Genesis 1 is the man of the worldly hierarchies. Man and woman are there together, and they're both in the image of God, and they both have dominion over the earth. Then we get to Genesis 2 and 3, and Adam is so different. There's no animal that can be his counterpart. And then he sees the woman, bone of his bone, flesh of his flesh. But pretty soon he'll turn, and that woman that you gave me. And so what we have in a sense is Adam 1 and Adam 2. And Adam 1 is the resume virtues, worldly accomplishment, status, money, Instagram pictures to impress your friends. Adam 2 are eulogy virtues, relationships, faithfulness, character. Nice guys finish last, right? So you have a glorious reputation of doing for others, but have you managed to claw your way to the top yet? At every funeral, it's the eulogy virtues that come out. Oh, well, maybe everyone will come if they've been famous or were a success or something like that, but what everyone talks about at the funeral was he was kind to me. He was faithful in his relationships. He took time to listen to me. This is what we value. Well, what's the deal about the two things? In the privilege meme, we ask ourselves quite rightly, how do you benefit from unearned status and opportunity? And this often gets talked about in terms of race. And living the life I have in terms of always being in the midst of the African American community, you very quickly realize that no, the world is not fair at all. A white society and white skin gives me privilege and opportunity and open doors that it doesn't for others. But that's not the only hierarchy. It's an effective meme, but it's not the whole story. And so then, well, you should feel guilty about your privilege. And if you do so, then ironically, you derive moral status. And now you have the status of having owned your privilege. So, very quickly, these status and privilege games turn on themselves. And Calvinists should feel a familiarity with this, because we should smell a trap, because if my privilege can just be dismissed by owning it, well then now I, in a sense, I have both my whiteness and my morality too. But then you go down and down and down into these games, and you wind up with this crazy amount of guilt, and beneath it haunts this assumption of finally it's the market meritocracy that governs. Well, there's an impersonality to the market that we have confidence in. And this is, in a sense, what we project up to God, and we say God should treat us like this. But apparently God doesn't seem to be terribly democratic. C.S. Lewis, in his great chapters on the grand miracle, says, to be quite frank, we do not all have the idea of we do not all like the idea of chosen people. Democrats by birth and education, we prefer to think that all nations and individuals start level in search for God, or even all religions are equally true. It must be admitted at once that Christianity makes no concessions to this point of view. It does not tell a human search for God at all, but of something done by God for and to and about us. And the way in which he does it is selective, undemocratic to the highest degree. Now, just not too many thoughts would have to say, well, Anthony Bourdain, he didn't come to this world on a level playing field. There is no level playing field in this world. He was white. He was talented. He was brilliant. He was fortunate in his connections and his relationships, and by virtue of all of that, he climbed to the top. It's not what you know, it's who you know. And we all know this, and we think, well, with God it should be different. And on one hand, the Bible often says God is not a respecter of persons. So there is a degree of meritocracy, but it's not alone. See, we prefer the impersonal. And a couple of weeks ago when I talked about Bart Ehrman, for all of the skepticism he eventually uncovered and revealed about the Bible and the resurrection and all of those things, those weren't the things that brought him to give up his faith. It was that so many people suffered. And we talked about the fact that it's a funny thing that when we look at suffering and think, I don't want to believe in a God, it doesn't mean that there's less suffering in the world. It just means it's impersonal, and somehow we feel better about that. And that's what we see in nature. But, Brandon Idle, who was at this church for a while, and those at Living Stones will smile when they hear me mention his name, he always had this phrase which drew my attention. I think he only said it twice, but I grabbed it right away in my mind. My God kills grandmas and puppies. Yeah. And most of space, C.S. Lewis says, is empty and filled with radiation and death. And here on this precious little blue globe, here we are with this amazing planet that we destroy, that we make into a place of suffering and misery. And God's chosen people seem mostly chosen to suffer and be hated. Well, what kind of a system is this? And I don't find it irrational that many of the celebrity atheists draw up all these kind of morality questions. Surely, if God is a God of love, he would have, well, right there we have to ask the question, would have what? would have developed a more meritocratic system. Oh. Would have given us a level playing field. Oh. And the world isn't that way. And that, of course, leads to all the theological questions that Christianity and other religions have been dealing with. And Christianity says God didn't make the world to be bad. This was our administration. Go back and read Genesis 3. The man and the woman said to God, "We want your stuff, but we don't want you. Please let us govern the world." And God retreats to heaven. And this is what we've done with it. One of the things that you begin to read as you read the Bible is that the Bible invites relationality. And while God is this impartial judge, on one hand, who has no personal partiality, he looks at people in terms of what they have and haven't done. And you find that again and again in the New Testament. At the same time, he has friends. And he seems to pick and choose among us. And well, this terrifies us, because what if he hasn't chosen me? Jesus in John 15 says, "As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love, and if you keep my commandments, you will remain in my love." And so right there you begin to get the sense of this openness of commandment keeping, yet this closeness of love. And I think if we're honest with each other, every relationship is full of both of those things. Just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. My commandment is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than to lay down one's life for his friends. Now remember that word. You are my friends if you do what I command. So right there again, this idea of friendship and yet openness. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I learned from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you. So right there it is. And appoint you so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, even beyond the grave. And so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. So now it's back to the personal. This is my command. So now it's open to your choice. Love one another. We're going through the book of 2 Kings, and there's a relationship that I want to highlight, because that was the next story. And I debated a lot in terms of how to preach this. And now I'm going back to a story that I preached on back before all the liturgical calendar came in with Advent and Lent and all of that. The story of the Shunammite woman. One day Elisha went to Shunem, which was a town, and a well-to-do woman was there, who urged him to stay for a meal. So when he came by, he stopped there to eat. She said to her husband, "I know that this man who often comes our way is a holy man of God. Let us make a small room on the roof and put a bed in it and a table and a chair and a lamp for him. Then he can stay there whenever he comes to us." Now, we're going to flesh out the character of this woman as we tell her story. Right away, what we know is that she has a good heart. She's married. She's wealthy. Now, in all likelihood, the wealth is from the husband. And in all likelihood, because of how men and women select mates, he's probably old, well in years, and wealthy, and she's probably young and good looking. Okay? This is kind of the picture that we have. Let's keep reading. One day when Elisha came, he went up to his room and lay down there. He said to his servant Gehazi, "Call the Shunammite." So he came to her. So he called her, and she stood before him. Elisha said to him, "Tell me, you have gone to all this trouble for us. What can be done for you? Can we speak on behalf of the king or the commander of the army? We have status." Elisha has status and privilege. She's got privilege of her own. She's wealthy. She's beautiful. She's young, probably. We're going to learn that in a little while. But she does have a problem. This is a very common biblical problem. In fact, you'll go all the way to Abraham and Sarah with this. She replied, "I have a home among my own people. I don't need anything. I'm wealthy. I've got a loving husband. I've got money. I've got resources. I saw your need. I reached out to you. I'm just happy to be able to serve. She's a good, godly. She is almost the epitome of womanhood in this story. What can be done for her? Elisha asked. This presumably is after she had left the room. Gehazi said, she has no son and her husband is old. Ah. She's beautiful. She's young, but she's barren. Then Elisha said, call her. So he called her, and he stood in the doorway. About this time next year, Elisha said, you will hold a son in your arms. No, my lord, she objected. Please, man of God, don't mislead your servant. Now, what do you know about the woman? In so few words, your imagination fills with her, and you get a picture of a woman who is the envy of many, but she doesn't have the one thing that is cherished most in the community, which is a son, which would give her status and value. So she's Sarah. She's Rachel. Leah is loved, Rachel is not. And the man of God says, I want to bless you more. And she says, don't raise my expectations. I'm a stoic. I'm happy by keeping my expectations contained. Elisha won't listen. God doesn't listen. But the woman became pregnant. And the next year, about the same time, she gave birth to a son, just as Elisha had told her. The child grew, and one day she went out to her father, who was with the reapers. He said to his father, my head, my head. His father told his servant, carry him to his mother. After the servant had lifted him up and carried him to his mother, the boy sat on her lap until noon, and then he died. She went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, and then shut the door and went out. So few words, so rich and powerful and passionate a picture. She called her husband and said, please send one of the servants and a donkey so I can go to the man of God quickly and return. Why do you want to go to him? He asked. It's not the new moon or the Sabbath. That's all right, she said. There's a lot about their relationship right in that sentence, too. What's going on? My young, beautiful wife? She won't tell him. She won't tell the boy's father. Well, who is the boy's father? Well, it's the man. There's no indication that Elisha has done anything using his power, anything inappropriate here. But she clearly sees, in a sense, who is responsible for the boy. She saddled the donkey and said to her servant, lead on and don't slow down for me unless I tell you. And she went out and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. When he saw her at a distance, the man of God said to his servant Gehazi, look, there's the Shunammite. Run to meet her and ask, are you okay? Is your husband all right? Is your child all right? Is everything all right? Elisha knows something. Everything is all right, she says. She lies to Gehazi. When she reached the man of God at the mountain, she took hold of his feet. Gehazi came over to push her away. But the man of God, this is just like the disciples pushed the children away. But the man of God said, leave her alone. She is in bitter distress, but the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me why. Did I ask you for a son, my Lord? She said. Didn't I tell you, don't raise my hopes? This world is a brutal world. God kills grandma and puppies. Elisha said to Gehazi, tuck your cloak in your belt, take my staff in your hand, and run. Don't greet anyone you meet, or if anyone greets you, do not answer. Lay my staff on the boy's face. And the child's mother said, as surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you. This is not romantic love. This is not sexual love. This is friendship. This is trust. This is devotion. This is faith. So he got up and followed her. Gehazi went ahead and laid the staff on the boy's face, but there was no sound or response. So Gehazi went back to meet Elisha and said, the boy has not awakened. When Elisha reached the house, there was the boy lying dead on his couch. He went in, shut the door on the two of them, and prayed to the Lord. Then he got up on the bed, laid on the boy, mouth to mouth, eyes to eyes, hands to hands. What's he doing? My life for his. As he stretched himself out on the boy's body grew warm. Elisha turned away and walked back and forth in the room, and then got on the bed and stretched on him once more. The boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. Elisha summoned Gehazi and said, "Call the Shunammite." And he did. When she came, he said, "Take your son." She came in, fell at his feet, and bowed to the ground, and she took her son and went out. And this is a good story. This is a happy story in this world where God takes grandmas and puppies. This is the story of Jesus, but Jesus hasn't come yet. Jesus is a better Elisha. That's been the point of these stories. But God still takes grandmas and puppies. And this boy that was saved will die. And the Shunammite will die. But then why? Why does Elisha do this? Why the favoritism? Why the miracles? Well, one of the things that you learn, that miracles aren't simply random acts of power. Miracles in the Christian religion are expressions of the kingdom that's coming in the world today. They're signposts and seals. They're indicators of what God's desire is for the world. Culturally, we have elevated romance and resume virtues above it. But Jesus uses it to describe the intimacy, friendship, the intimacy of his bonds with his disciples as he is about to give his life for them. The whole of what Jesus offers is friendship, and it is deep, with himself and with his Father, to join the family. Now Elisha said to the woman whose son he had restored to life, "Go away with your family and stay for a while wherever you can, because the Lord has decreed a famine in the land that will last 7 years." Did Elisha announce this to others? Probably. But she's his friend. Now her husband is dead. And so she goes away with her son to the land of the Philistines and is able to ride out the 7-year famine. 7-year famine, we're connecting up to other Bible stories. The Bible is hyperlinked, remember? The woman proceeded to do as the man of God said. She and her family went away and stayed in the land of the Philistines 7 years. At the end of the 7 years, she came back from the land of the Philistines and went to appeal to the king for her house and land. The king was talking to Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, and said, "Tell me about all the great things Elisha has done." Just as Gehazi was telling the king how Elisha had restored the dead to life, the woman whose son Elisha had brought back to life came to appeal to the king for her house and her land. Gehazi said, "This is the woman, my lord the king, and this is her son whom Elisha restored to life." The friendship, the miracle. He who has, more will be given. He who has not, even what they have will be taken away. Does this bother us? Yeah, it bothers me. Why? Does it bother God? Can God play favorites? The king asked the woman about it, and she told him. And then he assigned an official to her case and said to him, "Give back everything that belonged to her, including all the income in her land, from the day she left the country until now." What does this mean? Is God unfair? Luke 16, Luke 15 are the wonderful stories about the lost coin, the lost sheep, and the lost son. And in those stories, God goes out and finds the lost. And in fact, the whole story of Jesus is substitution. It's your welfare at my expense. In Luke 16, Jesus tells a story that almost everyone ignores. People know about the story of the prodigal son. People don't like the story of Luke 16 about the crooked steward. It's a parable of a lazy crooked steward who embezzles from his master and ingratiates to his master's debtor. And when he gets caught, he starts knocking down the debts of all the creditors because he says, I'm a thief, I'm lazy, I have no moral character. And then when he's caught doing this, the master praises him for his shrewdness and basically says he didn't bank on his own righteousness. He knew he had none. He banked on the master's righteousness. And so here's the story. God says, yeah, I play favorites. Yeah, I help my friends. And we say, no, you shouldn't. But all of us do. All of us do. And we frankly manage both. And right there in the picture of God, he manages both. But we don't trust God doing it because we don't trust God. That's the heart of the story. We don't trust God. We have trust issues. Well, these go all the way back to Genesis 3. The serpent insinuates to the woman, you can't trust him. He's holding out on you. So we do it ourselves. And we pull back from him and we say, I don't want to be his friend. My God kills grandmas and puppies. The master commended the dishonest manager because he acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into heavenly dwellings. What? What are you saying, Jesus? What are you saying we should do with our money? Are you saying God can be bribed? No, he's saying you've got Confederate money here. Spend it wisely. Where should you put your effort? Where should you put your time? You travel to the top of this world's pinnacles, and what? Does it satisfy? Does it make you happy? Is it fun? Yes. Is it thrilling? Is the climb thrilling? Absolutely. Is it full of meaning? Absolutely. But what happens when you get to the top to discover there's no there? Are you like Leo Tolstoy, who can't trust himself alone? The good rabbi, has figured this out and said, yeah, I'm not climbing up that ladder, but this world does not by any means respect my path until you come to a funeral. We enjoy friendship with God because God enjoys it, and because he's generous, and because he gives things to his friends. But unlike all the hierarchies that we have in this world, with celebrities, with the wealthy, with the powerful, God is not bound by time and space. It's not hard to be a friend of God. Put the time in to be his friend. Put the money in to be his friend. There's no limit to that. I often tell people if you imagine two lines in this world, one to love and one to be loved, everybody's in the to be loved line and no one's in the line to love. Why? And what does God say? God says, you want to be my friend? Love each other. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Be my friend. I long to be your friend. Well, does being friends of God mean that everything in our life is going to work out perfectly? Well, take a look at his son. Yeah, that's what causes us to worry. Yeah, if being God's son means going to the cross, if being God's chosen people means going to the cross, well, I'm not sure I want to be his friend. Well, there's your choice. Don't you want to get what you choose? The Bible says over and over and over again about how he draws near the humble and rejects the proud. How the poor in this world are rich in faith, and how the wealthy and the proud, they go away empty. It's not how all the hierarchies in the world work. All the hierarchies in the world work the other way around, where it's dog eat dog, where it's climbing on each other, where it's getting to the top. And then we get to the top and we realize this doesn't satisfy. I've got 1,000 quotes in my sermon illustration bank to make this, and I don't have a sermon long enough to produce all of them. Tom Brady, is this all there is? Married to a supermodel. Wins how many Super Bowls? I'm going to Disneyland. Is this all there is? Get to the top of the business hierarchy, you want to be on top of the political hierarchy. Get to the top of the political hierarchy, you want to leverage that to get all the money you can. The good rabbi says, everyone's chasing Adam 1. It's not until we get to the funeral that Adam 2 makes his appearance. As a pastor, people sometimes will ask me, do you like doing weddings? Not so much. I love doing funerals. What are you, crazy? You love doing funerals? I don't love mourning. I don't love the loss of my friends. I pastor a small church. Almost every time I do a funeral, it's because I'm burying a friend or a family member. But why do I love funerals? Because at funerals, the people who have invested in loving their God and loving their neighbor as themselves, they finally get the recognition they deserve. Because the nobodies of this world come up to the platform and say, whenever I was down, they would come and put their hand around me. When I needed a little money, they offered a scholarship for my kids. When I was in a tough spot, they listened to my complaining even when I was tired of listening to my own complaining. They loved me when no one else would. What does it mean to be godly? What does it mean to be a friend of God? Well, there it is. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. There's no status advantage to be his friend in this world. That's exactly the rabbi's point. You say, well, how do I know he'll have me? Sermon on the Mount. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open. For everyone who asks receives, the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks, the door will be open. Do you want to be God's friend? Be his friend. It's not hard. There's no line you have to stand in. You don't have to get his attention somehow. In fact, I would dare say he's been trying to get your attention. Do you want to be God's friend? Then be his friend.